When The Witcher 3 got announced, I was sort of interested in playing it, but I wasn't specifically looking forward to the day where I could buy it. I wasn't a fan of the first two games because of the clunky combat, so I was probably going to skip the third installment altogether. It wasn't until Sam and Enrique told me that it was definitely worth my time that I went out and picked it up. I expected to find a decent game, but what I actually got was a fantastic game that for me raises the bar for what a good RPG is significantly. I'd like to talk about what I loved most about the game, as well as talk about some stuff that I didn't like. Even though you play as Geralt of Rivia in this game, the true protagonist to me is a vast open world consisting of Velen, Novigrad, and the Isles of Skellige. The Northern Kingdoms is an interesting and unforgiving place. It's a world that does not care about you. A world that will keep turning regardless of your actions. It's an unforgiving world hell-bent on taking more than it's giving, and it confronts you with the very real possibility that no matter how many people you try to save, there's an equal and sometimes greater number of people whose death you were powerless to avoid. Hopelessness is a common thread throughout the storyline, and the game doesn't ask you to be everyone's savior. Instead, it tells you that you're just another cog in the great wheel that keeps this world turning. The game seems less concerned with the bigger picture, giving you a macro view of the life people are living. You commonly observe smaller moments that snowball into tragedies that affect only a small group of people instead of an entire world, at least until the game picks up. What's more is that Geralt is unmoved by the never-ending monsoon of misery that gets rained down upon the land. Hardly ever does he have a heartfelt response, and this is obviously in part because of the mutations that he underwent to become a Witcher, but it's mostly because these things are normal to him. Suffering is commonplace in his line of work, and is a normal thing for the kingdoms and the people at large. The world is the most depressing version of a fantasy medieval world. It has the most of the tropes that belong to the realm of high fantasy, but none of the cleanliness or epicness that you usually see in films, books and games that deal with dwarves, elves and halflings, and it does wonders for the atmosphere. Nobody is a hero most of the time, and everyone is scared. The game world feels, for all intents and purposes, as a real place, with real problems that affect real people. The first big zone that you get into after you finish the tutorial, which is set in White Orchard, is Velen. And Velen is in a state of eternal turmoil where every man, woman and child feels the sting of the ongoing war between Redania and the Empire of Nilfgaard, a place where the common folk live a life of constant fear and superstition. It really is an inhospitable place where every solution you come up with only causes more problems. And the game doesn't only have wastelands, there's also a large city called Novigrad. And Novigrad is a city that's being torn apart by witch hunts and racism, where everyone who displays even the slightest deviation from normalcy gets sentenced to death by burning on a pyre. It is here that the country's religious aspects come into full view in the form of the Cult of the Eternal Fire, and they are more of a holy army intent on removing every trace of non-humanity from their lands that uses an extreme form of faith to justify its cruelty. This contrasts starkly with the whoremongering and gambling populace that reside within the city proper, and this causes more than a little friction between the common folk and the higher societies. Lastly, but certainly not least, is Skellige. The island nation of Skellige stands on the brink of a civil war in the absence of a ruler by the time that you get there. Clans fight amongst themselves over who get to be the next king, while the threat of a Nilfgaardian invasion draws ever closer. Skellige is also the closest thing this game gets to the stereotypical Lord of the Rings type locale. It's a place that breathes the atmosphere you find in many fantasy books, while still feeling real enough to keep you grounded. It's comparable to Skyrim in terms of aesthetic, but it feels less improbable. And speaking of Skyrim, the way The Witcher builds its lore through literature found in and around the world also helps you to understand the world and its people. You can find a decent amount of stories worth reading in the strangest of places, and it makes a random stroll throughout one of the many forests in the world a more pleasant experience that sort of makes you want to go out and explore every nook and cranny. Another reason why you might don the Explorer hat is the insane amount of content to be found off the beaten track, and more often than not, the game only notifies you of this content when you're standing smack dab in front of it. Maybe you took a shortcut through a field to get to another town and accidentally found a cave that a monster inhabits. Maybe you find a bandit camp you can clear out and loot for some gear. Whatever it might be, the absence of large objective markers for this sort of stuff makes you want to look everywhere you can. And then there are the actual side quests and Witcher contracts that have actual stories. Every town is a notice board that will give you clues as to the location of some secrets, or it might send you to a quest giver who's in need of a Witcher's service. These optional side quests go way beyond the RPG stereotype of you going out to hunt 10 deer in exchange for some coin. More often than not, a simple task turns into a multi-part questline spanning one or more zones, and as you talk into a myriad of interesting characters with well-written dialogue that rivals the quality of the main story. However, The Witcher 3 is a game that has its troubles. The combat still feels clunky and slow, Geralt's strikes seem to have little weight behind them, and if you're not willing to bother with the oil system where you apply different oil steel weapons to fight different creatures more efficiently, the combat can get a bit tedious. The load times on the PS4 are also really long, which means that there's a lot of downtime between you dying and giving it another go. Horse riding also annoyed the hell out of me most of the time, with your horse randomly stopping for no discernible reason, even if you're riding along an empty road, making walking to everything the slower yet better option. All in all, The Witcher 3 feels like CD Projekt Red's magnum opus, both in terms of scale and in terms of mechanics. There's just so much detail hidden away within the world, so many characters to meet, weapons and armor to craft, choices to make, and a lot of those choices are made without you even knowing you've made them until it comes back to bite you in the ass, about 10 to 20, sometimes 30 hours later. If you're into the Western style of RPGs and you're looking for something to fill the void Skyrim left when you finish that game, then you should look no further. I'd be surprised if this game won't turn into a must-play classic for generations of gamers to come. And yeah, that concludes my sort of post-play review thing of The Witcher 3 The Wild Hunt, and I'd love to know, what did you think of The Witcher 3 if you've played it? Did this sort of review convince you to give it a go? Let us know, sound off in the comments. My name was Christopher Select Characters. If you liked this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, because we'll be doing this a lot more often, and we'll see you next time.